So I happened to be there in Israel too.
And so I was on a pilgrimage with my mom in Israel, and I turned around and I saw someone who looked super familiar.
Y'all, this Erika Kirk Israeli honeypot story just got way more sinister.
Does anyone else think this is Erika Kirk putting in fake tears into her eyes?
Let everyone see what true evil is. This is something that could impact a generation and generations to
What
come.
if the truth about everything we've been watching didn't come from an outsider, but from someone inside the circle? Because right now, people are reacting to what Charlie Kirk's own sister revealed about Erika. And it's not what anyone expected. At first, it sounded small, easy to dismiss. But then something changed. The details started lining up with things people had already noticed, but couldn't explain. And this is where it gets strange. Because if what she's saying is true, then the story everyone believed might have been completely backwards. So now the question is, what really happened behind the scenes? And why is it only coming out now? To understand why this moment is hitting so hard, you have to look at where the information is coming from. Because this isn't a random voice online. This is someone directly connected to Charlie Kirk, someone who would realistically have insight into what's happening behind the scenes. And that alone changes everything. Because up until now, most of what people believed about Erika came from outside perspectives. Observations, clips, assumptions built from what was visible, but then something changed. An internal voice stepped in, not with a full breakdown, not with a formal statement, but with pieces. Small, direct comments that hinted at a completely different version of events. And this is where it gets strange. Those comments didn't introduce something entirely new. They recontextualized things people had already seen. Moments that didn't make sense before suddenly started to feel connected. But here's the problem. Nothing was fully explained. No timeline, no clear sequence. Just fragments that pointed in a direction, but didn't confirm it. And that's what made it powerful. Because now, the story wasn't being told directly, it was being uncovered piece by piece, and each piece added pressure. Because if someone this close to the situation is speaking, even indirectly, then there has to be something worth saying. And once people realized that, everything changed. Because now, they weren't just watching from the outside, they felt like they were getting a glimpse inside. And that glimpse raised more questions than answers. It started with a message that didn't look like it would matter. No headline, no announcement. Just a short post that began circulating quietly. At first, most people missed it, because it didn't name names directly. It didn't explain anything. It just said, people don't understand what actually happened. And that's it. But then something changed. People realized who posted it. Someone connected to Charlie Kirk. Not just connected, family. And suddenly, that message didn't feel vague anymore. It felt loaded. And this is where it gets strange. Because once that connection was noticed, people started reading it differently. Not as a general statement, but as a hint, a correction. Something meant to challenge what people thought they already knew. But here's the problem. There was still no explanation, no follow-up, just that one line. And that gap, it pulled people in. Because now the question wasn't just what happened, it was what are we misunderstanding? And it doesn't stop there. Another message appeared, this one slightly more direct. She wrote, "Not everything you saw was real." That line hit instantly. Because now, it wasn't just about misunderstanding, it was about misrepresentation. And that's when things started falling apart. Because people went back, rewatching old clips, re-examining past moments involving Erika, looking for anything that didn't feel right. And weirdly, they started finding things, small details, moments that felt slightly off, interactions that didn't fully match the narrative people had accepted. And once those moments were pointed out, they couldn't be ignored. Because now, it didn't look like a clean story anymore. It looked fragmented. But then, something changed again. A third message surfaced. This one more specific. She said, "The story people believed wasn't the one we lived." That line spread fast. Because now, it felt like a direct contradiction. Not just a hint, a statement. And suddenly, everything escalated. Because if the public story wasn't real, then what was? And this is where the tension really started building. Because now, Erika's role came back into focus. Not as a background figure, but as part of the question. Part of what might have been misunderstood. Or misrepresented. But here's where it gets complicated. None of the messages accused her directly. None of them laid out a clear alternative. They just pointed at a gap between perception and reality. And that gap, it became the center of everything. Because now people weren't just asking what happened. They were asking what they got wrong. And that's a much bigger question, because it means the entire narrative might need to be re-examined. And once that idea took hold, the story stopped being stable. It started shifting, because now, every past moment felt uncertain. Every interaction felt open to reinterpretation. And that's what made this moment so powerful. Because it didn't give answers. It removed certainty. And just when it seemed like the confusion couldn't get deeper, another piece surfaced. And this one didn't just challenge the story, it hinted that something had been intentionally misunderstood from the beginning. The next piece didn't come from a new post, it came from how people started connecting the ones that were already out there. Because once that line, the story people believed wasn't the one we lived, started spreading, everything shifted. And this is where it gets strange. People stopped looking for new information, they started reanalyzing old moments, clips that had already been seen, conversations that had already been discussed. But now, they were watching them with a completely different mindset. Not what happened, but what did we misunderstand? And that change, it altered everything. But here's the problem. When you rewatch something expecting to find a different meaning, you usually do. And that's exactly what happened. Because suddenly, small moments started feeling bigger. A pause, a reaction, a shift in tone, things that once felt normal, now felt intentional. And it doesn't stop there. A specific clip resurfaced, one that had been overlooked before. In it, Erika is speaking calmly, confidently. Nothing unusual, but halfway through, she changes direction slightly. Subtle, but noticeable. At the time, no one thought twice about it. Now, people saw it differently. Because now, that shift felt like it was responding to something unseen, something off camera, something not fully explained. And that's when things started falling apart even faster. Because now people weren't just watching what was said, they were watching what wasn't, looking for gaps, looking for moments where something felt incomplete. And weirdly, those moments were everywhere. But then something changed again. Another message surfaced, this time even more direct. She said, "What people think was influence wasn't what it looked like." That line hit hard, because now it addressed something specific. Influence. The idea that had already been floating around. The idea that Erika might have been shaping things behind the scenes. And suddenly, that idea was being challenged. But here's where the tension really escalated. Because the message didn't deny influence entirely, it just said it wasn't what people thought. And that distinction, it mattered. Because now, the story got more complicated. Not yes, not no, but different. And that's harder to understand. Because now people weren't just dealing with a simple narrative, they were dealing with layers, possibilities, interpretations. And that's what made it intense, because every answer raised more questions. If it wasn't what it looked like, then what was it? And why did it look that way in the first place? And that question, it spread fast. Because now people weren't just analyzing Erika, they were analyzing the entire situation, how it was presented, how it was perceived, and how it might have been misunderstood. But the biggest twist? Still no full explanation, just fragments, hints, pieces of a story that didn't quite fit together yet. And that's what kept people hooked, because it felt like something was just out of reach, something important that hadn't been fully revealed yet. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more complicated, another detail surfaced. And this one didn't just question the narrative, it suggested that parts of it might have been shaped on purpose. The next detail didn't come from a new message. It came from how people started interpreting the tone behind the ones already posted. Because once the idea of misunderstanding took hold, something else started to surface. And this is where it gets strange. The messages didn't feel defensive. They didn't feel emotional. They felt controlled, measured. Like each one was designed to point in a direction without fully revealing it. And once people noticed that, they started asking a different question. Was this just clarification? Or was it something more deliberate? But here's the problem. There was no way to confirm intent, only patterns. And patterns don't prove anything, but they raise questions. And it doesn't stop there. People began comparing the timing of those messages to key moments in the story. When discussions around Erika intensified, a message would appear. When speculation started to shift in a certain direction, another comment would follow. Not directly responding, but redirecting. And that's when things started falling apart, because now it didn't look like random clarification anymore. It looked like influence, not over people directly, but over how the story was being interpreted. But then, something changed again. A specific phrase resurfaced from one of the earlier messages. The version you saw wasn't the full picture. At first, that sounded like a simple correction. Now, it felt strategic, because it didn't tell people what the full picture was. It just told them what it wasn't. And that leaves space. Space for interpretation, space for the narrative to keep evolving. And that's where the tension really peaked. Because now people weren't just trying to understand what happened, they were trying to understand why it was being explained this way. Why the hints, why the fragments, why no clear timeline? And that question, it pulled everything together. Because if someone knows the truth, why not just say it? Why leave it incomplete? And that's what made this moment so intense. Because the lack of clarity didn't feel accidental, it felt intentional. But here's where things got even more complicated. Because the more people looked for answers, the more interpretations they found. Some believed the messages were protecting someone, others believed they were correcting something, and some thought they were doing both at the same time. And that's when the narrative split again, because now there wasn't just one version of events, there were multiple, all built from the same pieces, but leading in different directions. And that's what made it unstable. Because when a story can be interpreted in multiple ways, it doesn't settle, it expands. And that's exactly what happened. Because now, every new discussion added another layer, another possibility, another version of what might have happened behind the scenes. But the biggest twist? Still no full explanation. Nothing definitive, just carefully placed pieces, and a growing sense that something important was being revealed, but only partially, and just when it felt like the story couldn't get any more intense, it did. Because now it wasn't just viewers analyzing messages, people closer to the situation started reacting. And that's when everything escalated. And that's when everything shifted from quiet curiosity into something much louder. Because now, it wasn't just viewers piecing things together, it was people closer to the situation reacting, subtly at first, but unmistakably. And this is where it gets strange. Some individuals who had previously stayed completely silent started speaking, not directly about Erika, not naming names, but talking about misunderstood narratives, about how public perception rarely matches private reality. And those phrases, they lined up almost perfectly with what had already been hinted. But here's the problem. No one clarified anything, no one confirmed what those statements were referring to. They just added more weight to the idea that something wasn't being seen clearly. And it doesn't stop there. A post surfaced from someone loosely connected to the same circles as Charlie Kirk. They wrote, "The truth isn't what people are arguing about, it's what they're not seeing." That line spread fast. because it didn't point in one direction. It expanded the mystery, because now people weren't just debating what was happening, they were questioning what they were missing. And that's when things started falling apart even faster, because now the conversation shifted again. From what did Erika do to what's actually going on behind all of this? And that's a much bigger question. But then something changed. The tone of the responses started to shift, more direct, more deliberate. One message stood out. It said, "People keep focusing on the wrong part of the story." That line hit hard, because now it felt like a correction, not of details, but of direction. Like the entire conversation had been pointing at the wrong thing the whole time. And that's when the tension really peaked, because now everything felt unstable. Every assumption, every interpretation, every conclusion people had drawn so far, all of it suddenly felt questionable. But here's where it got even more intense. Because Erika still hadn't fully addressed anything. No detailed response, no breakdown, just that earlier statement. And silence. And in a situation like this, silence doesn't calm things down. It amplifies everything, because now every missing answer becomes part of the story. Every gap becomes something to analyze. And that's exactly what people were doing. Looking at timing, looking at wording, looking at who spoke and who didn't. And patterns started forming again, but this time, they weren't about clips or conversations. They were about reactions, who stepped in, who stayed quiet, who redirected the narrative. And that's what made it feel bigger, because now it wasn't just one person. It was multiple voices, all hinting at the same idea. Something wasn't being understood correctly, but no one was explaining what that something was. And that's what pushed everything over the edge. Because now, the story wasn't just unclear, it felt intentionally incomplete. And that's when the biggest twist hit. Not another hint, not another message. Something deeper, something that didn't just add to the story. It changed how people saw the entire situation. And if what people are starting to realize is true, then everything we've been looking at might not be what actually matters. And then, the part that finally made everything click started to emerge. Not from a dramatic confession, not from a detailed explanation, but from stepping back and looking at everything together. Because when people stopped focusing on individual messages and looked at the full sequence, something became clear. And this is where it gets strange. Those posts weren't exposing a hidden villain, they were correcting a distorted story. Because the more you line them up, the more you realize they weren't pointing at Erika. They were pushing away from a narrative that had already formed. But here's the problem. They never said that directly. Instead, they used fragments, hints, statements that challenged assumptions without fully replacing them. And that's why it felt confusing, because the intention wasn't to create a new story. It was to disrupt the one people already believed. And it doesn't stop there. When you compare the earlier clips, the speculation, and the reactions, you see a pattern. The story about Erika didn't come from one clear source. It grew, piece by piece, from interpretation, from incomplete moments, from connections people made on their own. And those messages, they weren't building something new. They were trying to pull that structure apart. And that's the reveal. Not that something shocking was hidden behind the scenes, but that the version people were reacting to was never fully grounded to begin with. And once that narrative took hold, everything started aligning with it, even things that didn't actually confirm it. And that's what changed everything. Because now, the focus shifts from what happened with Erika to how did that version of events become so widely accepted? And once you ask that, the entire situation looks different. Because instead of a hidden truth being revealed, it becomes a case of a story forming faster than it could be understood. And if that's true, then the biggest twist isn't about Erika at all. It's about how quickly perception can turn uncertainty into something that feels real. When you step back and look at everything together, the posts, the reactions, the timing, and how the narrative formed, it stops being about one person. It becomes about how stories are built in real time, Because what this situation really shows isn't just about Charlie Kirk, Erika, or the people close to them. It's about perception. Think about it. A few unclear moments appear, people try to make sense of them, they connect dots, fill gaps, and suddenly, a full story exists, even if no one ever confirmed it. And this is where it hits deeper. Once that story forms, everything starts feeding into it. Every new detail gets interpreted through that lens. Every reaction becomes evidence, even when it might not be. And that's exactly what happened here. The narrative didn't come from one clear source. It grew from interpretation, from repetition, from the need to make something make sense. And that's what makes it so powerful, because once people believe a version of events, it becomes hard to challenge, even when new context appears. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Not just what happened in this situation, but how quickly something uncertain can turn into something people feel completely sure about. So now it all comes down to one question. Was there ever a clear story here? Or did we just build one because we needed the pieces to make sense? Because if a few vague messages and clips can turn into something this convincing, what else have we believed without ever seeing the full picture? Drop your thoughts below. Do you think this was a misunderstanding, or is there still something deeper we're not seeing? And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure you subscribe. Because sometimes, the biggest stories aren't about what's hidden. They're about how quickly we decide what